The message came in at 2 in the afternoon. Lucia Ferraro read it off the sounder the way she read everything, not letter by letter the way beginners did, losing the word while they were still finding the letters, but in whole words, the dots and dashes arriving in her mind, already assembled into language the way a musician hears chords rather than individual notes. She had been working a telegraph key since she was 14 in her father's instrument repair shop in Genoa, where the first undersea cable operators brought their equipment for calibration and sometimes stayed to talk, and she had been the one they talked to because she learned their language faster than anyone else in the shop, including her father. She was 29 now, the sole operator of the Carroll County Telegraph Station. It's a one-room timber building beside the rail siding at the edge of a settlement called Berryville, in the Ozark Hill Country of northwest Arkansas, where the ridges ran north to south, and the hollows between them held small farms and timber operations, and the particular stubbornness of people who had been in these hills long enough to stop explaining themselves to outsiders. The message was from the station at Yellville, 40 miles southeast. It read, "Fire moving northwest along Kings River drainage. Wind strong from south, all stations alert." Lucia read it twice. Then she looked south through the single window of the station at the sky above the ridgeline. The sky was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not the orange wall of an active fire, or wrong in the way that experienced eyes read wrong before inexperienced eyes see anything at all. A brownish quality to the light, a flatness to the shadows. The particular haze that meant smoke was already present in the upper air, even though the source was still miles away and below the horizon. She keyed the relay to the Fayetteville station north, copied the Yellville message, and added 4 words of her own observation. "Smoke visible from Berryville." Then she stood up and looked at what she had. The station building was company property, not hers to make decisions about. The equipment inside it was her responsibility. The sounder, the relay battery, the spare keys, the message logs going back 14 months. But she had standing orders that in the event of fire threatening a station, she was to remove the equipment, and the logs and herself in that order of priority. She began packing the equipment into the 2 leather carrying cases she kept under the table for exactly this purpose. Outside, the settlement was beginning to notice. She could hear it, voices changing pitch, the particular urgency that moves through a small community when something shifts from ordinary to serious. A woman called out from somewhere north of the station. A dog barked and kept barking. Lucia latched the second case and picked up both by their handles and went to the door. The sky to the south had changed in the 12 minutes since she first looked at it. But the haze was thicker and had taken on a yellow quality that she had never seen before, but understood immediately the way she understood things, by their internal logic, by what they had to mean given what she already knew. Yellow smoke meant the fire was burning dry grass and scrub, not timber. Grass fires moved faster than timber fires. Much faster. She set the cases down outside the door and went back inside for the message logs. A man appeared at the station fence. She did not know him. He was perhaps 40, lean and trail dusty, leading a horse that was pulling a small 2-wheeled cart loaded with timber cutting tools. He had the look of a man who had been working in the hills and had come down to the settlement for supplies and had arrived at the wrong moment. His name, she would learn later, was Cormac Bell, and he was a timber contractor from over the Missouri line who had been working a cutting operation in the hollows south of Berryville for 6 weeks. He had no connection to Berryville, no claim, no family in the settlement. He was as alone in this place as she was, for different reasons. He looked at the sky, then at her and the leather cases, and the logs under her arm. "How fast?" he said. She didn't ask what he meant. "Grass fire, south wind," she said. "An hour, maybe less." He looked at the cart. The tools in it were his livelihood. He looked at the horse. The horse was his transportation. He did the same calculation she had done and arrived at the same place. You could not save everything, and the question of what to save had to be answered in the next 30 seconds, or the answer would be made for you. "Leave the tools," she said. "Take the horse and go north on the ridge road." He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has just been given correct advice by someone he did not expect to give it. "I know this country," she said. "The ridge road stays above the drainage. The fire will follow the creek bottoms." "How do you know that?" he said. "Because I have been reading weather reports and fire reports on this sounder for 14 months, she said. "And because the wind is from the south and the drainages run north, and fire goes where the fuel and the wind take it, and both of them are pointing up those creek bottoms right now." He left the tools. She picked up the cases and the logs. They went north together on the ridge road, with the horse between them, and the sky behind them, going the color of a forge. The fire took Berryville in 40 minutes. But the ridge road held. Lucia had been right about the drainages. The fire ran north along the Kings River Creek bottoms exactly as she had said it would, following the dry grass and the cedar scrub that choked the hollow floors, pushed hard by the south wind. From the ridge above, they watched it move. Not a wall of flame, but a fast-moving line of orange at the base of a column of brown smoke that rose and flattened at altitude and spread north ahead of the fire itself. It reached Berryville in less than an hour. The settlement was not large, 40 structures at most: the telegraph station, the dry goods store, a livery, a mill, 24 homes of varying quality ranging from sound timber frame to raw lumber barely a season old. The fire took most of them, yet what it left was the stone chimney of the dry goods store standing alone in a field of black ash, the iron frame of the livery gate, and the stone foundation of the mill at the creek edge where the millwright had built on bare rock, and the fire had nothing to grip. Cormac Bell stood on the ridge road and looked at what remained of the place he had been resupplying from for 6 weeks, and said nothing for a long time. Lucia set the equipment cases on the ground and opened the first one and checked the sounder. Undamaged, the battery cells intact, the spare keys wrapped in their cloth still dry. She looked north along the ridge road to where it descended toward the next settlement, a place called Eureka Springs, 8 miles on. Then she looked at the smoking ruin of Berryville below, at the settlers who had fled north ahead of the fire were already beginning to come back down the road. She could see them, families with what they had managed to carry, a few with horses or mules loaded with bedding and food sacks, most with nothing but what they wore. Their faces held the particular blankness of people whose minds had not yet caught up with what their eyes were showing them. She made her decision the way she made most decisions, quickly and from what she knew rather than from what she felt. She turned to Cormac Bell and said, "I need to set up the sounder. I need something flat and stable at the height of a table, and I need a dry space above it." His cart had good timber boards in it beneath the tools. She looked at the boards. He looked at where she was looking. He began unloading the tools without being asked. They built a field station on the ridge road in 2 hours. Cormac's timber boards across 2 flat rocks made a work surface. He cut 4 forked stakes from the roadside timber with his felling axe and drove them into the ground and laid cross pieces to make a roof frame. Lucia had canvas in the bottom of the second equipment case, a company-issue weatherproof cover for exactly this eventuality. She lashed it over the frame with the cord she carried coiled in her coat pocket. It was not a building. It was a covered work surface on a ridge road. It was enough. She connected the battery, set the sounder, and keyed Fayetteville. Berryville Station destroyed by fire. Operator Ferraro active from field position. Ridge Road, north of settlement. All traffic relay through this position until further notice. Fayetteville came back inside 40 seconds. Confirmed. Relief supplies dispatched from Fayetteville. Estimated arrival 48 hours. What is needed? Lucia looked at the settlers coming down the road. She looked at the ash field below. She looked at Cormac Bell, who was watching her key the sounder with the focused attention of a man filing away information he expects to need. She keyed back. Food for 40 families, timber for framing, medical supplies, well digging equipment. The settlement's well was in the valley floor. She did not yet know if it had survived, but the casing was timber, and timber did not survive what she had watched move through that hollow. Then she added, glass for windows, seed stock for autumn planting. Cormac raised an eyebrow at the last two. You are thinking past the first week, he said. Someone has to, she said. But she kept the field station running through the first night, relaying messages between the displaced settlers and their families in other counties, passing supply requests to Fayetteville, receiving and distributing information on which roads were passable and which were still burning. The sounder ran almost continuously. Her hand on the key was the thread that connected 40 families to the world outside the ash field, and she held that thread without stopping except to eat half a piece of cornbread that a settler woman pressed into her hand at midnight. Cormac kept the field station standing. He reinforced the canvas roof against a wind that came up after dark. He kept a fire burning at a safe distance for warmth. He brought water from a spring he found 200 yards north along the ridge, a cold and clear, and running from the limestone shelf that the fire had passed over without touching. She noted the spring carefully. A cold limestone spring above the fire line, undamaged, running clean. She filed it in the same part of her mind where she kept useful information, the part that her father had called her instrument room, the place where things went that would be needed later. By the second morning, the settlers had begun the work of assessing what remained. The stone foundations of 6 structures were sound and could be built on. The mill foundation was entirely intact, and the millstone itself had survived, half buried in ash but uncracked. The creek that fed the mill still ran, its water gray with ash, but moving clear by midday as the upstream drainage cleaned itself. Lucia walked the ash field with a settler named George Parr, who had been the de facto leader of the community, a careful man, a former surveyor, who moved through the ruin with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at foundations the way she looked at circuit diagrams, reading what they could still support. She showed him the spring on the ridge. She showed him the mill foundation. She showed him the 6 sound bases that could carry new framing without delay. He listened to everything she said and wrote it in a small book. Then he said, "You know this kind of work. My father repaired instruments," she said. "You learn to see what still functions and build from there." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I would like you at the planning meeting tonight." But it was the first time anyone in Berryville had asked her opinion about anything that was not a telegraph message. She said yes. The relief wagon from Fayetteville arrived on the morning of the 3rd day. 2 wagons, in fact. The first carried food, medical supplies, and the timber framing materials Lucia had requested. The second carried something she had not requested, but had hoped for: a second telegraph operator sent by the company to assess the station damage and determine reconstruction timeline. His name was printed on his company card as Mr. A. Reeves. He was young, perhaps 22, and he looked at the field station Lucia had built on the Ridge Road with an expression she recognized as the specific surprise of someone who expected to find a problem and found a solution instead. He said, "You kept the line open." She said, "Well, that is what operators do." He looked at the canvas roof and the timber board work surface and the sounder sitting level and dry and connected on its improvised table. He picked up the message log she had kept through the 2 nights on the ridge, every relay, every supply request, every family notification written in her precise hand with the time noted in the margin. He read several pages without speaking. Then he said, "I will tell the company this station needs permanent reconstruction. Full timber. Stone foundation. I will recommend immediately." "Good," Lucia said. "Use the mill foundation site. It is the highest stone base in the settlement and the most defensible against future fire coming up from the drainage." He wrote that down. Now, and the planning meeting George Parr had called on the second night had been held around a fire on the Ridge Road, with 30 settlers seated on toolboxes and wagon boards and bare ground. Lucia had sat at the edge of it at first, uncertain of her place in a gathering that was fundamentally about land and structures and community decisions that were not her domain. Parr had called her in from the edge by name. She had stood and told them what she knew. The spring on the ridge, clean, cold, limestone filtered, running above the fire line. This was their water source for reconstruction, reliable and uncontaminated, accessible without digging. The mill foundation was sound, and the millstone uncracked. The mill could be rebuilt first, before the homes. Because a working mill meant flour, and flour meant the community could feed itself through winter without depending entirely on relief supplies from Fayetteville. She told them the autumn planting window was still open if they moved within 2 weeks. The ash field below was not ruined ground. Ash was mineral-rich, a fast-growing cover crop of winter rye planted directly into the ash would stabilize the soil through winter and improve it for spring planting simultaneously. She had read this in an agricultural report relayed through the Fayetteville station 6 months earlier and had filed it in her instrument room because it was the kind of information that was useless until it was essential. A woman near the fire said, "How do you know all of this?" Lucia thought about how to answer that honestly. 14 months of messages, she said. Every flood report, every fire report, every agricultural notice, every supply request from every station between here and St. Louis. I read all of it. I had to. I was relaying it. But I remembered it too. My father taught me that information has weight. You carry it until it is needed, and then you put it down in the right place. The woman looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, the way people nod when something has settled into sense. Cormac Bell built the new telegraph station himself. He had not planned to stay in Carroll County past the week he had originally allocated for resupply. He stayed 6 more. He used his own timber tools and the framing materials from the relief wagon and the sound foundations Lucia had identified, and he built a structure that was better than the one the fire had taken. Stone foundation, a double-framed walls, a roof pitched steep enough to shed the heavy Ozark rains that came in late autumn. He worked methodically and without waste, the way men work when they are doing something that matters to them beyond the money it might earn. Lucia watched him and understood that the fire had clarified something for him, the way emergencies clarify things. What a person is willing to rebuild tells you what they actually value. On the day the new station was complete, he came and stood in the doorway and looked at the sounder mounted on its permanent table and the message logs arranged on the shelf she had built from his leftover timber, and said, "It is better than what was here before." "Yes," she said, "it is." He said, "I have work in Missouri in the spring, but the cutting operation I had in the hollow is gone. There is nothing to go back to until spring." She looked at him steadily. "There is work here through winter," she said. "Parr needs framing on 4 more foundations before the cold sets in." He stayed. The winter rye went into the ash field in the 2nd week of October, planted by 12 families working together across 3 days. By November, it was showing green across what had been black, a thin, even growth that caught the low autumn light and held it. The settlers who had lost everything stood at the edge of the field and looked at it and felt something shift in them, not back to what they had been before, but forward into something they had not expected to reach this quickly. The mill was rebuilt by Christmas. The first grinding happened on the 23rd of December, the millstone turning on its sound foundation, and the creek running clean below it. Lucia sent the message to Fayetteville herself. Berryville Station fully operational, mill restored, settlement population stable, all families sheltered for winter. Fayetteville came back, confirmed. "Well done, Ferraro." She read it once. Then she filed it in the log, in her precise hand, with the time noted in the margin. Outside the new station window, the rye field ran green down the slope toward the creek, alive and unhurried, growing through the short December days toward a spring that was already certain. If Lucia and Cormac's story pulled you in, hit the like button. It tells us to keep these stories coming. Subscribe to Wild West Survival Tales so you never miss the next character fighting to stay alive on the frontier. Just drop a comment below. When George Parr called Lucia in from the edge of that meeting by name, what do you think that moment said about the kind of leader Parr was and what it cost him nothing to give her? Because on this channel, the next survivor is already waiting.